We move on to item 3, football update. I'll ask Steve Cuss, the first team manager, which you all know, to give you an update. Steve?
Okay, it's very much a position where we start from now, where I look back at 12 months ago where we were then. So, you know, Paul's little talk there was about growth and putting things in place, and you know, I think that's what it's taken us a year to do. You know, this time last year I had 3 players that have had Southern League experience, 3 players that have played for Wimborne Town, Roasty, Jordan Cole and Jamie Davison. To be fair to the latter 2 there, they probably played less than 20 games. So, you know, it's a very much a different feel for us this summer, and it's been a much quieter summer for me, I've got to say, because obviously I had to sign 15, 16 players last summer, and this time it was a case of adding some real quality to our squad, because I felt that towards the end of the season we had a squad that was very much capable of competing at the Southern League level. And I think that was proven in terms of the form guide at the end of the season, where I think we finished in the top 6 of the form guide for the last 8 or 10 games of the season. So, you know, I trust those players very, very much. They are a great squad to work with, and first and foremost it was to make sure that we retain that squad for this coming season. So I guess you're going to ask some questions in a minute and about some individual players, which I'll be delighted to answer. But I'm pleased to say that the majority of that squad's believe in what we're trying to do here. It was pretty easy negotiations with most of them. They want to stay, they have signed, they have recommitted, and all looking forward to pre-season training starting this coming Saturday. So it just left me with a bit of a task there of just trying to fill in a few gaps where I thought we might need 1 or 2 players, and probably the top target was a wide player. We had plenty of midfield players, but probably not a natural wide player as such. So that was one player that I would target straight away. So I think it's common knowledge that Kevin Gill has signed for us now. So Kevin, if you don't know, Kevin is a lively character. We'll add something to our dressing room as well. But he's a fantastic player who works his socks off. I'm sure he'll be a crowd favourite. He is a natural wide player who will hopefully deliver some good service to the good competition of strikers that we've got. So the other signing was Steve Smith. I've had the pleasure of working with Steve before. Fantastic goal scoring records. I think speaking to 1 or 2 of you outside, you know, we say goal scorers score goals. I know that sounds obvious, but they can score goals at every level. And I'm hopeful that with the opportunities that we give Steve, that Steve will add some goals to us this season and prove to be a very good signing. So we brought those 2 signings in, as well as John on the backroom team staff, John Edwards, who has joined us as physio as well. It's obviously an area that we were looking to improve. Probably didn't get that quite right last year in terms of looking after the players off the field, which is very important. So John's a massive signing for us as well, and sure that will help, because as Paul said, finances play a part in how many players I can have and the size of squad that I can have. And you know, I will always have to work with, well, certainly the foreseeable future, a squad of 16, 18 players. So the more of them that are fit and available to me, the better. And we all know this is a punishing league, and if you have 4 or 5 players out, that's damaging to your prospects for the weekend. So John's going to be a vital member for us as well. On top of that, we do have some more trialists that are coming in with us, so there could be potentially some players more joining into the squad. But 3 or 4 players, a couple that are new to the area that obviously know about the club and have contacted us and are coming in for training. So we'll have a few new faces on show in pre-season as well. So we are just looking forward to the fixtures coming out. I think the FA Cup and FA Trophy draws are out this Friday, with the league fixtures the Friday afterwards, with somebody new to the league. So it's been a bit of a quiet summer, but you know, I'm sat here now, like I say, really trusting the players and believing in the squad that we've got, and hopeful that we can get off to a really good start, because I believe if we get off to a good start, you know, just relax everybody, take the pressure off the players, and then we can really go out and play. So hopefully we get through pre-season with no injuries and we're ready for that August the 18th start.
I'd just like to say during the end of last season, of course, we competed a lot better. We got our squad up together, and it was a great dressing room atmosphere. And that obviously comes down to Steve and the lads working together, and Paul as well.
I'm
what
going
you
to
were
save
saying,
myself a phone
Richard,
call.
sorry, right, Richard.
I'm going to save myself a phone call here, Steve.
Okay.
I think there was one player before you went on holiday hadn't re-signed. Is that right?
Tom Hill.
Yeah. Has any movement on that?
Current situation with Tom is I don't know if everybody's aware, but Tom is not too local. He's not miles away, but he lives at Lymington, so it's with a full-time job. It's a fair commitment for him to come over to here 3 or 4 times a week to train in the matches. So his situation's open at the moment. He is doing pre-season with Bashley. It's not dead in the water that he will come back to us, but at the moment he is starting pre-season with Bashley.
And keep your phone to your side on Friday afternoon, please, Steve.
Okay. Keep your fingers crossed for a good draw.
Yeah, that's right. Brian Brewer. Sorry.
Yeah, the way we finished up at the end of the season, if we played like that at the beginning of the season, instead of being down at the bottom, we'd have been up the top.
That's quite right, Brian. Because,
I think it takes time to build as well, Brian. Where, as I said, a couple of minutes ago, where we were sat here last year, it was 15, 16 new players who hadn't played at this level of football. They were all West 16 players that stepped up, and that was what we had. And some players will make it, and some players have made it and are still in the squad, and some players will go by the wayside, as you saw throughout the season. Some players didn't quite make the grade and dropped back into the Wessex League, and that was the nature of what it is, and that's difficult to do when you've got 15, 16 players that you've got question marks over. This year we haven't got those question marks. Every single one of the players will be better for the 40 games that they played at Southern League level. They've got that experience behind them, they know what's expected, they know that this is a tough league to play in. And for all those young lads that are out there, that season last year, although it was frustrating at times and it was very, very difficult, they'll be better players for it. And as you quite rightly say, towards the end of the season, when we had the squad that we're going to carry through, our results were much, much better. So that gives me great optimism, and I'm sure it does for you, that we can get off to that start that we're looking for.
Steve, you must sort of stick with the 4-3-3 formation, which, at this level, I think is a tremendous asset, really. So
Yeah, I just said someone outside, we don't play with strikers now after Spain, do we?
Yes.
Steve, yeah, we don't need any strikers, we just play with midfielders. But yeah, no, I think it's interesting. What I am fortunate is that I've got a good bunch of players that can adapt to anything, and I think Scott alluded it to in his programme notes a few times, that we're capable of playing many different formations. One thing that we were conscious of, that even towards the end of the season as well, we didn't pick up enough points away from home, so sometimes you have to be a little bit, you either really go bold and stick 3 strikers right up there, or you stick with an extra player in midfield. So we've got the options to do that, and I've got some talented players that can play in a variety of different positions as well. So I wouldn't say that we're going to play 4-3-3, I wouldn't say we're going to play 4-4-2. I think we can adapt to whatever we think is necessary for that particular game.
Well, with the pitch now better, actually, what would you fancy football?
Yeah, we try and play. We know, I think you look at the stature of our side as well, we know we can't just lump the ball forwards. We've got to try and play a little bit, but you've got to get that fine balance, and I think we probably went over the top at the start of the season where you pass the ball, but you've got to pass it with a purpose, and you've got to score goals at the end of it. So, we've got to get that balance right, but certainly it's in our minds that we play in a certain style, we have to try and entertain as well, but as part of that, everyone enjoys winning, and it's doing all this, as I keep saying, it's like my dressing room now, that's what I say to the players. You've got to do all those ugly things well, and you've got to tackle, and you've got to fight, you've got to win that ball back, and you've got to defend properly, and that's what we learned to do across the course of the season, which ultimately got us better results towards the end.
Yeah, Steve, can I just say something?
yeah, the one at the back side, right.
Is Kevin Gill, is he a right or left-handed player?
He's right-sided. He can play on the left as well and cut in, but he is predominantly right-sided, yeah.
So we can expect to see somebody on the wing this top side.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Down at that far end.
Yeah. Believe you me, we do talk about it at half time and before the games about using that top bit, but for whatever happens, it seems to slide down the hill a little bit.
Perhaps you'd like to come move up the stand this way. You like it.
But Kevin, on a serious point, Kevin is where we played probably central midfield players out wide, and the tendency then is they'll always try to go inside because that's what their game is. Kevin is a natural wide player who will stay out wide, and when you've got a player out there, players become accustomed
2 seasons in this Southern League, one thing I have really noticed, that the games are won and lost just before a half-time and just before the final whistle. You know, if you look through all the results and that and see when they're scored, all the games are right at the last minute.
Yeah.
All the time.
It's an unforgiving league, that's for sure. If you come out at half-time and you're not quite at it, as happened a couple of times, you get punished. And you know, we've talked about that before. We talked about going right to the end. And I think actually, if you look at stats, we're not bad at the end of the games in terms of if fitness is anything to go by.
Just before half-time, I think was one of our mistakes.
Yeah, we did let in some goals at crucial times, and I think, again, we talk about getting the first goal in the game. I think it's so vital with this league to get the first goal in the game. It changes the way you play, your mindset, so it's important that you score first. And again, that probably didn't happen as many times as we wanted it to, but did towards the end of the season.
Steve, last year, it seemed most of you had 15, 16 players. Most of the time, you had nobody come off the bench. You had 2 or 3 young players, and you couldn't change the situation. Okay, we've got 15 players now, probably. 1 or 2 maybe the partner who's going on. Do you think you must have an idea in your mind how you're going to play, where you're going to play? You know, whether somebody's going to hold the ball. Like you tried someone last year, didn't work. You know, how do you see you keeping people happy? And Steve Smith will score goals, but they're off the bench. Ball, you know, you must have an idea how you're all going to play this year.
I'd like to think that, yeah, it's always a delicate situation for a manager in keeping players happy, because when there's so many local clubs around, you know, you spend a bit of time on the bench and players want to go and move on. Hopefully the things we put in place here with, you know, behind the scenes in terms of the coaching and the looking after the players, and the, you know, the hospitality they get here, they get well looked after, is the fact that they would like to stay. In terms of the competition for places, 100% agree with you. At times we had not much off of the bench, but I think if you look at it this year, with 16, 17, 18 players that we've got, there's some real competition for places. You look at Steve Smith coming in and fighting for a place with Tom Jeffs, Matt Kemble, Jamie Davison up front. If you play 4-4-2, that's 2 playing and 2 on the bench. That's not a bad thought to have. So it's the same with the midfield area with George Webb. You know, Tom Hill if he comes back, Mickey Hubbard, John Blake, Kevin Gill now. There's good competition throughout, and it's the same with the players at the back. And you know, I'm hopeful that our squad is rely on a lot of injuries and suspensions and staying fit and things. So, but there is competition for places, and I think that's one thing that's come back from the players this year. You can actually feel the sense that there is.
Young players from reserves, I mean, obviously there's going to be injuries, there's going to be suspension.
Yeah, I mean the 2 options we had last year, one is that we blooded a few young players from the reserves, which will continue to happen when the time is right. For instance, in the cup final when young Ben come on and did terrific and really showed some great promise, and Ben will be in and around the first team, and it's important that, you know, I look after Ben in a way that he doesn't play, that he's expected to play 30 games a season. You know, he'll come in and play when the time's right. So for the younger players, the other option was that I obviously used connections that I had at Bournemouth to bring players in. Now that was a bit of a needs must last year and probably won't happen as often as it did this year, but it's obviously a link there that we can bring in players when we need to as well.
Mr. Brown, did you play?
Yeah. Could I ask Dave, did Dan Ackerman sign again?
Yes, he has.
Yeah. Will he get a bit of more chance this year?
Yes, he might be having an early chance. I suppose it's the right time to say it, he's recovering now, but Jason Harville had to have an operation during the summer, and for the injury we managed to keep that fairly quiet. Didn't want it to go out in public knowledge, but unfortunately the injury that he got at the last game of Faction was a tear of his ligaments in his knee, and the only way was an operation. So he's had that operation. The recovery time is 8 to 12 weeks. From the date of the operation to the first game of the season is 8.5 weeks. So it's touch and go whether Jason will be there. So again, Dan Ackerman is around and never let us down when he played before. So to answer your question, yes, he'll be in and around and pushing for a place.
I was very impressed with it.
Yeah.
Is Jason Collins staying with us, Steve?
Jason has moved on to Christchurch towards the end of last season. But the situation with Jason is that if I needed a third keeper as such, that we can call on Jason should he be available to play, but obviously he's number 1 at Christchurch at the moment, so he's a young man who wants to play, so he's dropped to Christchurch
Good
to do that.
prospects he's got.
Excellent, he's a good young. just to go back on what Pete said, I just to back that up with in terms of fans, I didn't hear too much, probably because I'm a bit like Arsene Wenger in the dugouts, I didn't hear too much, but the support throughout the season was good, and you know the players do appreciate it, and I've got to say that the reception that we had when we came off the pitch at the last game of the season was exceptional, and we walked into the dressing room afterwards and said, can't believe what we've just witnessed there in terms of the response that we got from supporters for where we finished in the league. What happens when we win something? And that was the final bit that happened at the end of the season. So, you know, I'm grateful for the support that we got. I think people realised the position we were in. It takes some time to build a side. Grateful for the board for supporting me when the press were hounding me a little bit during October and November. But you know, hopefully we'll build on, and the things that we've put in place will make the club be stronger. And certainly with the youth sides that we've got coming through, we're very optimistic that we'll have homegrown players playing out there in not too many years to come.
Supposing there's injury crisis here, God forbid, seems decimate maybe. Would you sort of like see them bring in like loan signings from, say, Bournemouth,
Yeah,
making more links?
again, without praising and look like I'm sucking up to the board here a little bit, but they've been great to me in terms of when I needed a new player. They've done that. We know that we've got budget restraints, and we know that we can't probably compete with some of the other clubs in terms of the transfer market and players' wages. I accept that as a manager, and we work with players, and that's not a problem. But at times, you're right, you do get down to the bare bones, and every player that I've asked to bring in, the board has said, fine, bring them in, and I'm sure, hopefully, if the case arises next year where we need to bring in one or two, they'll back us again to do that.
Have you got access to Jamal this year at all?
Yeah, well, you know, that's yeah. It's an ongoing thing with AFC Bournemouth. The relationship was terrific. I think, you know, ultimately they're pleased with players coming out and playing for us, and you know, it's a lot of managers won't play younger players, and I was happy to play those players. And I think we had 5 Bournemouth players on loan throughout the season. 3 of them went back and made first team debuts at Dean Court. So, you know, that's good on our part that happens, and obviously Bournemouth know that we look after those players very well, and hopefully that, you know, should the situation where any of those young players need to come out on loan, you know, first thought is that they come here, and if it suits us to take them and they want to come here, then we'll always look at that option.
Steve, I spoke to all 5 players at the end of their time. Every one of them said they only wanted to play. That would be passed on down to the ranks of AFC Bournemouth. Everybody wanted to come here.
And that's not just for us, that's for you, the supporters as well, because you know they're young players, and you give them the support that they needed to enjoy themselves here in what was certainly at the early part of the season a struggling time. I think when Dan struggled was here and Dan's Parsons, you know, it was a struggling time for 2 young 18-year-olds to be playing in a struggling team week after week. The last thing they would have wanted was for some supporters to get on their backs as well, which never happened. So you play your part in that as well.
Do you think the development squad that they've introduced means you've got less likelihood of getting it? Because I see that there was stuff they wrote saying that they sent out some first-year pros to us, for example, but they're not thinking of doing that this season, was the impression I got.
Yeah, they've got a development squad this year which is going to play about 20-25 games, so they'll go into that. But I think when the time's right for an individual to come out, they look at each player on an individual basis. And when the time comes out for them to come and step up to senior football and play against men as such, then they'll look at it individually, and that player might be available to come out.
Do you think Jamal will come back? Because he's going to be in a development
It's a
squad.
sweep, Steve, wasn't it?
Yeah, Jamal did terrific for us, and he was an exciting talent. But he was contrary to what people say, and say that, you know, he was never our player. He was a player that Bournemouth sent to me. He was too old to play for the youth team, and he came to us on a full-time basis. So Bournemouth were always tracking his progress, and you saw. He was a youth team manager at the time. He's now the first team manager. Paul Groves often at our games watching, and obviously they got high hopes for Jamal. He's part of that development squad. He will be playing for that development team. Who knows? It could be the opportunity he comes back and comes out on loan to us again.
It must be better than this year. Last year, you said obviously what the situation you had, and you had to bring in people, young players, who, with the best will in the world, did a good job. But if you've got everybody that you're paying, then that must be positive.
Well, I think it's mentioned about team morale. Team morale comes from having a group of players that stay together and go through thick and thin together, and that's what we had at the end of the season. Now, needs must, as it resulted, as players came in, weren't quite good enough, so they had to go back and drop into it. And it resulted in that we used 45 players. Now, I'll be amazed if I use 45 players this year with what we're starting with. We've got a settled squad. I'm optimistic and trust that squad that we're going to do well. And the players know the way I pick the side is if they perform, they stay in the team. So we're hopeful that we'll only use a core of approximately, I would say, about 20 players this year, maybe low 20s, depending on injuries and suspensions.
One thing that Paul didn't do last year, Steve, they weren't top of the league at all, were they?
I think we were once when we were first game of the season.
You might well have used 45 players, but I think from the supporters' perspective, you could see from the very first 3-4 matches of the season, you might have used that many players, but there was definitive progress from the beginning of the season towards the end of the season. It was always, you might have used that many players, but it was always altering a piece of that jigsaw, playing a player there, moving people around, and there was definite progress through the season. So from the supporters' perspective, I'd like to thank you for that, Steve. There's a lot of hard work that obviously went into that. Just one personal question. Has Brad re-signed?
Brad is obviously Brad was unfortunate that he wasn't in the Brad McGugan wasn't in the starting 11 towards the end of last season. Now again, he's a young man who wants to play regular football, but he loves it here, and he's coming in on Saturday, and he's going to be working his socks off during pre-season to show me that he's good enough to be in that starting 11, and I'm hopeful that he will remain with us.
I mean, being able to step in as he did in the final and produce the goods like that in the back four, when he's really a utility player in front of that back four. So
he's another quality player who can play in so many different positions, Brad, and he's somebody that I want to keep for sure. So we're just trying to convince him that he's going to get enough game time as such for him to stay with us, because you can appreciate, young men want to play football, don't they?
Yeah,
and it's not easy when they're sat on the bench.
As you said, it's all about building a squad and a set of team players together. So
it is.
I hope he wants to be part of that.
He certainly likes the club and wants to stay. It's just about his game time.
Do I need to speak to Ken afterwards?
Any more questions?
Yeah, how many reserves are able to step up tomorrow?
We've changed the reserve situation a little bit. There was some good situations with reserves last year, but also some things that we probably needed to open up the pathway for the young players to come through. So we've got a new reserve team manager in Ed Taylor, and Ed is also doubling up as running one of the under-18 sides. So the link between that is very, very clear and progressive for them now, so we can see those players play on a daily basis and train with them and come through. So the younger players will form the basis of our reserve side. I would like to guess that we'll probably have the youngest reserve side out of any side in that Wyvern League this year. But we've cleared that pathway through for the young players to play. So people like Ben Mogg, who's been mentioned a couple of times tonight, will play regular reserve team football and then be on the fringes of the first team. People like Tom Hunt, young players, there's a nice clear pathway for them to come through.
So there's less likelihood of becoming disillusioned?
I hope not. I hope that they see the opportunities. I think what we try and sell to the younger players is that you get opportunities here. Marcus Cullen, for instance, he had half a dozen games for the first team. I don't know he would get half a dozen first team games at any other Southern League club at 18 years old, because again, not harping on about budgets and things like that. If someone does get injured, I'm not able to go out and sign a player or to replace that person straight away. So I want to look at our reserve side, I want to look at the younger players, so we've definitely set that clear pathway for them to be there. And they'll be joining the first team squad for training. We train together, they'll be added to the squad when it allows to be, so they get that bit of experience, and hopefully the progression will just continue and we'll see them come into the first team and do well for us.
Steve, can I just ask, if we're having clearly there's an emphasis on younger players rather than a 35-year-old coming out of a league club or whatever it might be, I think we would all agree with that. Are we then making sure that we protect our assets to make sure we don't unearth that nugget that finally gets across the line and then suddenly find that an AFC top come along and pinch it from under our nose at the end of the season?
It's something that we've talked about board level since I've been manager about securing the assets of our young players. This current season, I think we're likely to have six or eight players on contract, and they are the ones that are under the age of 24, the younger players. So if one of those younger lads is going to step up and play higher football, then it just can't be poached by the likes of Tottenham or anybody else.
I appreciate it's a balancing act with budgets and things, and it has to be right for both parties. But clearly, you don't want to have someone who's really good and then just sometimes is on non-contract terms and away you go.
Yeah, I think with the contract situation is for me as the manager to go to the player and say that I trust you and I want you on a contract and you're going to play a major part in our season. So it's quite nice for the player to sign a contract as well. And but the younger players certainly are on contracts and hopefully secure for the season.
But you're on about the younger players. It's not just reserves. You go down to the 13-year-olds. They've all done well this season.
We've got a terrific youth set up here, and as time allows, I try and get involved in that as much as I can. I think during the course of last season, I took training sessions for 3 or 4 different age groups, under 10s, under 12s, and so on. And I've been out and watched the youth team play, so I've got a good handle on the players that are coming through. And you can't neglect that. If you've got a good youth set up, you've got a plan that they're going to come through and be part of your first team in years to come. And I just hope that I'm the manager when that 13-year-old is 18 and bagging a few goals for the first team. So we all have to be patient with young players, and it does take time, but it's 100% we've got a thriving youth section here that are well run, with some good talented players in there. And what pleases me most is with our youth section is that when I go and watch them or speak to them is they talk about Wimborne, they talk about playing for Wimborne, they don't talk about going and playing for anybody else. They're talking about when I can come and play for the first team. And the lad I was talking to the other day was 13, and he said, how old do I have to be before I can play for the first team? So, it's a good atmosphere within the youth setup, and there's some talented players, and we're trying to bridge that gap between adults and youth football, but we have to be patient with that. There's very rarely does a 16, 17-year-old come along and play first team football week in, week out. We have to be very, very careful with that.
It's like Kevin Gill, isn't it? He was here as a 17-year-old, wasn't he?
Yeah,
he progressed and he got snapped up. And he signed contracts here, there and everywhere, but it's nice for him to come back. Local boy.
Going back to that gentleman's question there, it's harder to keep the youth team players ready for Steve than it is actually keeping some of the first team players, because I think although it's quite a good record to have, I think the youth over the last 2 years now, there's 5 players have actually gone to league clubs from Wimborne youth players. 5 of the players have gone to league clubs and taken on their apprenticeship or they've joined their centre of excellence teams. So it's quite a good thing for Wimborne in terms of we're able to produce players from our youth ranks that are going to obviously go to that level of football. But equally, it's quite frustrating because what we don't want to do is lose all the good players by the time they reach a decent age. So and you can't contract them. I've looked into that. But you know what? That's something to be proud of as a local club. To provide 5 players that are actually good enough to go to a league.
The key there is that we're doing the right thing as a club, aren't we?
Absolutely.
And eventually that will pay dividends. As you said, it may be frustrating in the short term. Just we're doing the right things. I didn't mention it in my earlier thing, but just very quickly, because it is about football, is the club as a whole have actually taken on the running of the youth as well. Although it was done excellently before and it's progressed very, very quickly in probably 3 or 4 years, what happened was it had overtaken itself in terms of its organisation. So people that were involved were getting busier and busier and busier with coaching, and unfortunately the administration side of it was kind of going downhill a little bit. So we approached the youth people who, I'm the vice chairman of the youth anyway, so we approached the chairman and the secretary and suggested that we take that over. So the club actually runs the youth section now as well. So and I think although it's been very hard work for the last, since April when it happened, both for myself and Kenny looks after the finances, the long-term benefits of that should be pretty good.
As a manager, do you ever feel and have the approach towards cup games, FA Cup, Trophy, I believe you mentioned, that sort of level as opposed to the Dorset Senior Cup, that they're a waste of time and, well, we'll put out a team, but,
maybe we ought to concentrate on the league.
No.
You know,
We try.
I would hope not.
No.
I'm just asking for your opinion.
There's a little bit of pressure on the FA Cup because of the prize money that's at stake, but
Well, exactly. Yeah.
we
Every
treat
time you turn out.
we treat every game we want to win it, and people talk about the Dorset Senior Cup maybe being a little bit less, but I'd say that cup run that we had was vital for us during the season, where we were obviously in the midst of some struggling league results. The Dorset Senior Cup was a welcome relief for us, and the players enjoyed that, and obviously getting to a final. It was difficult to put a team out in the final because we had so many that were cup tied, but we treat every game, we want to win every competition.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't demean the Dorset Senior Cup. I just meant that you know, often it does seem that, oh well, you know, it's Saturday and, you know, in the first week in September, and well, we'll give it a bash, but there's another league game next week and we'll have a better crack at that.
There's actually the Red Inshore Cup, which is what a lot of clubs do tend to put their weaker players and all their fringe players into, is the new rule out. You've got to replace 7 players that have played in one of the previous 2 games. So
Yeah.
You only have to see the teams that reach the final.
That's a different format for this year. So it will be primarily a first team competition.
And I did
realise
we want to try and win everything.
Also, Pete, that League Cup, which everybody seems to poo-poo, is £3,000 winning cheque. That's not bad, is it?
Yeah, actually we changed that.
I think it might be slightly.
Well, we did well in that cup actually. We've not shown it in that.
I think, Ken, that if you don't enter the Dorset Senior Cup, the club gets fined
£600.
600.
Right. Yeah. So, any other questions on football before we move on?